So now talk a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. as far as human trafficking.
Okay. So when you have a chance, I would strongly recommend that you read Louis Shelley's book. You know, Louis Shelley, Dr. Shelley is actually a professor at the School for um, Governance, Public Policy here at Mason. And whenever we talk about human trafficking in the United States, it depends on which region of the U.S. are we talking about. We're talking about the southern parts of even the. I'm not really familiar how the different states are being divided. And the northern part of the U.S., for example, in the East Coast. Okay, many traffickers use a different approach there as well, compared to the Midwestern. And so it depends on what form of human trafficking thrives in that particular region. Here in Northern Virginia, it's very much on sex trafficking. And so traffickers use the model we call pimping, maybe because of the physical proximity to the country's capital, Washington, D.C. This is also considered one of the richest, Fairfax, Arlington, Washington, D.C. And so this is actually one of the hubs of sex trafficking. I think it's in the top five, in terms of sex trafficking in the United States. In the Midwest, for example, on the West Coast, one very common form of trafficking that's happening there is labor, cheap labor. Taking advantage of the presence of these migrant workers, and many of them happen to be undocumented. And so Las Vegas, for example, so many of the establishments are actually employing undocumented workers, because it's cheap labor. Many of these workers don't necessarily complain whenever they are being exploited because, they're afraid. Because what usually happens is when the victim of trafficking reports his or her case, she gets punished, And so in that case, we also need to change the way we treat and look at the victims of trafficking. That's why instead of them, approaching law enforcers or law enforcement agents, representatives, they would rather, approach organizations that run illegitimate business because they feel they're well supported, So it really depends on which area of the country you want to explore more, about the whole issue of human trafficking. So every region within the continental U.S. has specific, unique form of trafficking. Depends on what best and what thrives most in the region.
Okay, so specifically Northern Virginia, it's sex trafficking here. Is there anything like about this area that like allows that to be more prominent than other forms?
That's a very good question. I don't know. Because Northern Virginia, even here in Fairfax now, we actually rank, I think, third, if not fourth in the country when it comes to sex trafficking problem. As to what explains, I'm not really quite sure about that. I think it's a combination of several factors.